Just 8 months before the outbreak of World War II, a series of terrorist attacks, as skillfully coordinated as any by Al-Qaeda, were felt all over England. Bombs exploded in power stations and substations from Northumberland to Manchester, from Liverpool to London. This was the work of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, the notorious terrorist group fighting for a united Ireland. And this campaign was part of something that they called the S Plan. S stood for sabotage. In Britain, there was outrage. In response, the police arrested 66 terrorists and seized 1,500 sticks of gelignite, along with 2 tons of the highly explosive potassium chlorate. But the bombing went on. But one group of observers looked on, not with horror, but with admiration. The Nazis decided that here were people they could do business with. War with Britain was just months away, and these terrorists looked like they could be useful. So they began to search for someone they could trust to track down these potential allies. The man they found, Oscar Faus, had made his name fundraising in the United States of America on behalf of the Nazis. Before it entered the war, the USA had its own pockets of Nazi support, particularly in Chicago and New York. Faus's English was good, and when he returned home to Germany in December 1938, he was recruited to German military intelligence, the Abwehr, where he was soon presented with a challenging mission.
They immediately sent Oscar Faus to Ireland in February 1939 to make contact with the IRA and to explore the possibility of cooperation. Oscar Faus was ill-informed. He didn't know how to contact the IRA, but nonetheless, by a roundabout route, he made contact with the IRA.
Eventually, he met the 2 most senior members of the organisation, Chief of Staff Sean Russell and Head of Bomb-making Seamus O'Donovan. Both Russell and O'Donovan were veterans of the Irish struggle for independence. All of Ireland had been under British rule since 1801. On Easter Monday 1916, hundreds of members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood seized key locations in Dublin and proclaimed the Irish Republic independent of Britain. O'Donovan and Russell were officers in the Dublin Brigade of the IRB. So too was Eamon de Valera, who later as Prime Minister of Ireland would be forced to confront them as adversaries. The rebels were no match for the British armoured cars, artillery and machine guns. After 7 days of fighting, the Republicans were beaten. The IRB lost over 300 men, and more than 3,000 were arrested and interned. Among them, Sean Russell, Seamus O'Donovan, and Eamon de Valera. But they were lucky. 15 were executed without trial. The legacy of the Rising was to drive many more Irish into the hands of the Republican movements. In 1920, all IRB prisoners were released. The group was renamed the Irish Republican Army, and it began a bloody guerrilla war with the British. After fierce fighting and over 5,000 IRA deaths, a truce was agreed. In 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed, creating an independent Ireland in the south, but the 6 counties of the north would remain under British rule. Eamon de Valera was vehemently opposed to the partition, but chose to pursue a political solution. He would become Prime Minister in 1932. But for others, the separation of the north and south was unacceptable. Seamus O'Donovan, Sean Russell and the IRA turned back to the bullet and the bomb. It was a decision that would set them on a collision course with their former IRA comrade.
As far as the IRA are concerned, they are as opposed to the government in Dublin, which they saw as puppets of the British, as they are to the British continuing to control Northern Ireland. And the IRA are a substantial enough force in the 1920s and in the early 1930s in Ireland. They still have, upwards of maybe 15,000 men. They're still attempting to arm and train and bring in new recruits.
The IRA regrouped and retrained under the watchful eyes of a new and determined leader.
Sean Russell becomes leader of the IRA in 1938, and in many ways he's the archetypical IRA militarist. He has very little interest in wider politics. He says, we've done enough talking, we've had enough division over politics, this has got us nowhere. What people want from the IRA is a campaign to drive the British from Ireland. He comes to leadership in the IRA by promising a campaign.
Sean Russell, now Chief of Staff, appointed Seamus O'Donovan as his Director of Chemicals, that is, Chief Bomb Maker. It was they who devised the S-Plan.
The idea is that they'll be able to cause so much disruption that they'll put Ireland back on the headlines in Britain, that the British public will be forced to become aware of the partition of Ireland, and that therefore they'll put pressure on the British government as a result.
But now, as war grew closer, the two became increasingly interested in how Germany could help their cause, and relished the contact with German spy Oskar Faust.
They weren't driven by attraction to Nazism as an ideology. They were driven by this nationalist impulse to achieve unification and the ending of partition. And everybody who would assist in that was welcome.
On the basis that my enemy's enemy is my friend, O'Donovan made 3 trips to Germany in 1939 to meet German intelligence, the Abwehr. He was always escorted by his new German friend, the Nazi spy, Oskar Faust. At the first meeting in February, he discussed the supply of German arms and ammunition, but the Germans were not convinced, and he returned to Ireland armed only with a code name, Agent Hero. With Oskar Faust he went back in April 1939 and again in August, where this time he was taken more seriously. At this last meeting at the German Foreign Office was Joseph McGarrity, an American IRA fundraiser. Seen here with Sean Russell in New York City, McGarrity is thought to have provided the cash to fund the S-Plan. McGarrity's job was to show the Nazis that there would be cash to back up the IRA's actions. O'Donovan returned to Ireland with a radio transmitter and a code for his Nazi contacts. But O'Donovan and Oskar Faust also carried a message from the Abwehr. It had told them that Hitler would supply German reinforcements if the IRA could devise a foolproof way of helping them defeat the British. But almost immediately, the relationship got off to a shaky start. The IRA couldn't work out how to reach Germany with the Abwehr radio. The signal was either too weak or was blocked. And it wasn't long before Eamon de Valera's Irish intelligence services were listening in. though communications had broken down, the IRA would live to fight another day. On the 25th of August, they brought the S-Plan to Coventry. An IRA volunteer left a bicycle outside a shop in the city centre. In the basket was 5 pounds of high explosive. The timer was set for 2:30 in the morning, but the bomber planted the device at midday, and the bomb went off in the afternoon. Five people were killed instantly. The outcry was muffled when 9 days later, Britain declared war on Germany. But the actions of the IRA and their S-Plan would lead to bitter clashes between the British and Irish governments. Because the war created huge problems for Irish Prime Minister Eamon de Valera. The former IRA freedom fighter knew that it was politically unacceptable to support his nation's former rulers. De Valera had to tread a fine political line. Though the Irish were certainly not pro-British, they also didn't want the Nazis to succeed. It was simply not possible for de Valera's Irish Republic to join Britain as an ally, though in fact many individuals did join up in the struggle against Hitler. De Valera decided that Ireland should remain neutral. De Valera angered the British because the German and Japanese embassies remained open for business in Dublin. They were an obvious security risk. And de Valera also refused to allow the British to use Irish ports as bases, an act that caused great concern in the Royal Navy.
While the loss of the use of the Southern Irish ports is a severe handicap to the Navy in its ceaseless life and death struggle in the Atlantic, their acquisition by Germany would be a disaster.
The Southern Irish ports were critical because before the war they had kept Britain supplied with food and equipment.
In my view, the starvation of this island, rather than its invasion, is still Hitler's aim, and to achieve this, a German seizure of the South Irish ports may well be on his agenda.
The threat of starvation was even more likely to succeed because de Valera had allowed German ships to use Irish waters. British convoys bringing supplies across the Atlantic were forced to divert to the longer northern approaches, leaving them vulnerable to attack by German U-boats. The Battle of the Atlantic would eventually be won, but only after the loss of over 3,500 ships and more than 30,000 men.
The hour of victory is postponed, and therefore soldiers as well as sailors go to their graves, with every ship sunk in the Battle of the Atlantic. Yet Mr. de Valera will not budge.
But the one thing he did agree to was to turn on the IRA. And in December 1939 came an event that left de Valera in no doubt he had to act. 2 days before Christmas, a crack IRA team raided the Irish Army magazine fort in Dublin and stole over 1 million rounds of ammunition. 13 lorries were used to transport the 20 tons of shells away. Though almost all of the ammunition was recovered, the Germans heard about the raid and were suitably impressed. In response, de Valera and his government passed new emergency legislation, nominally to thwart any invasion by the Nazis, but in reality to crack down on the IRA. The Irish Army and Navy were mobilized and routinely simulated a German invasion of Ireland to prepare for the real thing.